Hello, it's Alex and welcome to Hey Little Thrifter. Today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in November. First up was We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson, and this was the pick for last month for my Pittsburgh Horror Book Club. If you live in Pittsburgh and you like reading horror and you want to come meet up with us, I will put the link to our group down below. Feel free to come join us, it's awesome. Anyway, this was our most recent pick and I loved it. It is about a family, two sisters and an uncle who live in a big house. They're a very wealthy family and have always lived in that area, and the other inhabitants of the village don't like them, and throughout the book we're learning more about the characters and what happened with them and why the villagers don't like them. I thought this was so well written. I just loved it from the beginning. All the characters are so interesting and well written. You could really visualize each one, even if there weren't many specific descriptive factors. They were just so well written that you could visualize them yourself somehow, which really made them feel real. It's not a horror novel in the sense that there's really scary things or horrific things going on all the time and ghosts or monsters or something, but there's just a sense of unease and tension throughout the whole book, and overall it's really quite unsettling. I don't want to give too much away, obviously, because I think you should just go out and read it for yourself. But yeah, there are definitely some creepy moments and some really shocking moments. The main character, Mary Cat, spends a lot of time in her own head, and she has a lot of kind of repetitive and ritualistic behaviours, and I actually connected with that quite a lot. So even though there's a lot of unease and tension within their house, they have a somewhat isolated existence, and with Mary Cat's imagination, she tends to have a lot of kind of happy and magical instances to her life, while there's just under the surface there's just this sense of dread going through it. So yeah, I absolutely loved this. I would highly recommend it, and I gave it 5 stars out of 5. I was really pleased that we read this, and we had a really great discussion about it at the book club that we had. Next up, I read What the Hell Did I Just Read by David Wong, and this is the 3rd book in a series, the other ones being John Dies at the End, and this book is Full of Spiders, which I read when they came out, thoroughly enjoyed them. I thought they were brilliant, and I had no idea that there was a 3rd one coming out. I knew that he had written a 3rd book, but I believe that's a standalone. I think I just happened to see something online maybe that there was a 3rd John Dies at the End book, and I was like, okay, I need to read that now. So I immediately went online and requested a copy from my library. It's hard to say too much about this with it being the 3rd book in a series. I obviously don't want to spoil it for anyone that hasn't got this far, but the whole series is about a guy called David, his best friend John, and his girlfriend Amy, and they end up being a weird little trio who deal with weird stuff that's happening, whether it be monsters and aliens and yeah, whatever else they encounter, because weird stuff is happening all around them. These are just so much fun. They're really well written. It's like a weird mix of really silly and really clever all at the same time. And yeah, there are definitely some laugh out loud moments, and it was just thoroughly enjoyable. I don't think this one was quite as good as the other 2 books. I just remember like really enjoying them, whereas this one I just really enjoyed. So I gave this one 4 stars out of 5. Next up, I read These Violent Delights by Victoria Namkung, and I got a copy of this from NetGalley and I read it on my Kindle. This is about a student who is at an elite girls' boarding school in Los Angeles, and while she's there, one of her middle-aged male teachers grooms her and sexual harassment that takes place. And from the premise, I thought this would be set on campus and these events were unfolding as we read the story, but that wasn't actually the case. The story takes place some years later when the student is now working as an intern at a newspaper and she wants to become a journalist. So the main character, Grace, she decides to go public with her story about this teacher at her old school and what happened to her. And because of her coming forward, some other people also start to come forward with similar stories about the same teacher and some sexual harassment and sexual abuse that happened to them. And so an incredibly important topic, and one that is very timely also, with all of the allegations and people coming forward, with various people in power in the news at the moment. Unfortunately for me, I just didn't think this book was that great. Like I say, the subject matter is very important, but I just don't think it really brought anything new or interesting to the discussion. It really did read like a news story. There wasn't really much more to it than that. I feel like it could have still been interesting if the characters were better written, but I felt they were all quite flat and cliched. There is some time spent on trying to develop the characters, but they're all just very stereotypical. For example, one of the characters has, dyed hair and tattoos, and she's the one that has mental issues, and that's just such an incredibly lazy stereotype that it was insulting. So there were parts of the story that I thought were good and well written, but for the most part it was just very slow and predictable, and I'm just not really sure, other than it having an important topic, I'm just not sure what its purpose was. And it wasn't a very long book, but I really did struggle to get through it, and I had to force myself to read the whole thing, and in the end I gave it 2 stars out of 5. And last up, I read Bonfire by Krysten Ritter, so another new release. I guess this was a rare month for me that I read 3 new releases in a month. That's not typical for me, but this one has a lot of hype surrounding it at the moment. Krysten Ritter is quite a famous actress, also known as Jessica Jones, amongst other characters, and this is a thriller. It's her debut novel, and I decided to request a copy from the library because I thought it sounded really interesting, and yeah, I've finished this now, so I need to return it soon. So this tells the story of Abby, who is an environmental lawyer. She lives in Chicago, and she's investigating a company back in her hometown where she hasn't been for years, who is thought to have been polluting the water, and people are starting to get ill, but she's trying to figure out if there's just a big cover-up or whether they are actually as clean and law-abiding as they say they are. The story that runs alongside this is that Abby is looking into the disappearance of one of her former friends at high school, Casey, and Casey had complained about illness while they were in high school, and then she disappeared and seemingly no one has seen or heard from her since. So this is 10 years after high school. Abby is returning back to her hometown to investigate the problems with this corporation and also try and figure out what really happened to Casey. And I somewhat enjoyed this book, but I kind of wanted to like it more than I actually did. I found that it was quite convoluted. There were lots of characters and different story threads running throughout the book that it became a bit much at times. I also found that some things just weren't very realistic, and I don't want to give plot points away, so I'm not going to mention specifics here, but just certain things I was like, yeah, I don't think that's how that would really come about in real life. Another thing I didn't quite like is that Abby is a somewhat interesting character, but I feel like the author maybe tried a bit too hard to make her a complex and flawed character, and it was a bit paint by numbers. So we had strained relationship with father, check. Possible problem with alcohol, check. It was still a decent thriller. There were certain things that I did quite like about it and that I enjoyed, and it certainly kept me intrigued enough to keep reading. But overall I just found it a bit convoluted. Yeah, I liked it but I didn't love it. So I gave it 3 stars out of 5. So that was everything I read in November. I think I had a decent reading month. It was a bit all across the board though. I had a 2-star, 3-star, 4-star and 5-star. Thankfully no 1-stars though. So I guess we can be thankful for that. Let me know what you're reading at the moment, or if you have any recommendations. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!